Good. Okay, so just bring this down. Okay. So hello everyone, sorry for the delay. We're going to do something slightly different this time. One of the things that people complained last time that it was just a presentation and no one can see me. So hopefully now that you can, you have something new to complain about. Today's webinar, and actually the webinar this month, we're going to talk about 3D Secure. One of the things that we've mentioned is that the topic is called the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when we go over the presentation, you'll probably understand why. A couple of important announcements on how this is going to be managed. I'm just going to go over everything you have in the panel of the webinar. You can basically choose to write your questions. I'm going to make a pause every couple of slides just to see what kind of questions we have, and I'll answer the questions. So it might be the case that I will already answer your question following the next slide. If not, we'll also have an additional time at the end of the presentation to ask additional questions, and hopefully it will be interesting for everyone. Let's start first with general introduction. So let's talk first about what is 3D Secure. And I've highlighted a couple of words just to make it clear on what we're discussing. So first of all, 3D Secure is an internet protocol, which means that it's related to internet or online transactions. It's designed as an additional authentication step, which we'll discuss on exactly how it works and what does it mean. And it's designed to be an extra security layer for online credit and debit card transactions. So it doesn't relate to other forms of payment methods such as wire transfers or alternative payment methods. So this is something that is used only for card payments. The first people that actually developed, or the first company that actually developed and deployed 3D Secure was Visa back in 2001, so 15 years ago. About 1 year afterwards, MasterCard quickly adopted the standard and started offering this as well. A couple of years after MasterCard, JCB also joined, and eventually in 2010, American Express, and the latest to actually join are in 2013 is Diners Discover. This protocol, so 3D Secure is the name of the technology, and I'll also explain on why is it called that way. But it has different commercial names based on the different card schemes. So with Visa, this is called Verified by Visa. With MasterCard, it's MasterCard Secure Code. JCB calls it J-Secure. American Express calls it SafeKey, and Diners Discover call it Protect By. So different names, but it all means exactly the same thing, exactly the same implication, slightly different. I've come across in the past a lot of people that say, no, I don't need to work with 3D Secure because I have Visa, Verified by Visa or Secure Code, so this is pretty much the same thing. So just so you know, it has different names. Now, the first question that usually I get when we try to discuss 3D Secure is why would we need it to begin with? So it's pretty clear, and I hope you can see all of the minor numbers. If not, I'll just let you know the different things. So first of all, the main reason on why we need 3D Secure is because of fraud. What you can see here on the left, and all of you will have access to this presentation, so even if there is something small that you can't read or you can't see, then you'll be able to see it afterwards when you get the presentation. So overall, if I look globally, in 2015, we don't have the data yet for 2016 because the year hasn't ended yet. In 2015, online transactions accounted for about very, very close to $2 trillion globally. Now, I don't know if you can see these numbers over here, but almost 0.5% of that was reported as fraud in 2015. That's an enormous number. Now, if we look at the actual industries where fraud was mostly reported, and again, this is based on sales in that industry. So software, all kinds of companies that offer online software or software development, 0.89% of all sales reported as fraud. Financial services, companies in industries such as binary options, Forex, algo trading, 0.79%. Gaming, just regular games. If people know World of Warcraft, EVE Online, as well as some other types of games, 0.59% of transactions reported as fraud. Gambling, poker, bingo, casinos, etc., 0.56%. Retail, regular retail, people just buy shoes, shirts, whatever online. 0.45%. Travel industry, hotels, plane tickets, all kinds of other activities that you do while traveling, 0.37%. And media and e-content, 0.31%. Overall, worldwide, 0.47%. So you can see that this is a significant amount of money that is being lost annually as a result of fraud. Now, if we look at where fraud is coming based on countries, again, you can see, I mean, it obviously corresponds to the same numbers. So it's 0.47%, but some countries are a bit more fraudulent than others. So you can see, for instance, in the US, 0.5% of all sales in the US online sales are reported as fraud, 0.4% in the UK, in France, 0.74%, Germany, 0.5%, Netherlands, 0.8%, Belgium, 0.4%, Spain, 0.58%, Russia, 0.68%, China, 0.36%, Japan, very low, 0.3%, Brazil, 0.47%, Mexico, 1.31%. This is an enormous number. So more than 1%, almost 1.5% of every transaction that is done online in Mexico is fraudulent transactions, okay? And this is something that is should be very concerning for everyone. So I hope that everybody understands why 3D Secure was developed. Basically, all of the card schemes started with Visa, and then, as I've explained, with the others. All of them wanted to reduce the number of fraudulent transactions that they see and basically keep more money in everyone's pocket. So let's talk a bit on how 3D Secure works. So this is the typical transaction flow that you will see for a regular non-3D Secure transaction. So the cardholder will approach the merchant payment page, will put his card details on that payment page. The 16-digit card number, the expiry date, CVV, his details, etc. This data is going to be sent to the acquirer. The acquirer will send the data to the issuer, the issuer will give back a response, and that response is pushed back to the cardholder, whether it's success or failure. So pretty simple. Everybody knows this. This has been done a lot. Now let me show you how a 3D secure transaction flow looks like. Don't be scared, it's a bit off-putting. So as you can see right off the bat, a lot more transactional flows, and I'll explain how it works. So cardholder approaches the merchant payment page. Basically, they would do the same as with a non-3D secure transaction. So they would put in the card number, the expiry date, the CVV, their details, and they would click pay. Now, what would happen at this point? The merchant or the payment page of the merchant, because some merchants would use a payment page that is designed, hosted, provided by a third party. So that payment page and gateway behind it would contact a directory server to see whether the card is enrolled in 3D or not. And they would receive a response. Let's assume in this case the response is positive. The card is enrolled in 3D. What would happen at this stage? Now, mind you, the acquirer at this stage is not involved yet in the process. So the merchant would redirect the cardholder through the payment page, redirect the cardholder to a web page that is hosted by the issuer. And they would need to authenticate themselves with the issuer before they can continue at this stage. So once the cardholder is authenticated, then this authentication, the fact that the authentication was successful, is relayed back to the gateway provider, who only then forwards the transaction details together with the authentication to the acquirer. The acquirer does exactly the same thing from this stage as they did with the non-3D secure transactions. They go back to the issuer, they ask the issuer if the transaction should be authorized, and the issuer authorizes the transaction and the or not, and the response goes back to the cardholder via the merchant. And hopefully the merchant also, the cardholder receives the goods or services. So as you can see, this is a much more complex and time-consuming process. Now, why is this called 3D? This is also an answer that I get a lot, and I get a lot of very question that I hear a lot, and I get a lot of very weird answers. In essence, it's called 3D secure because there are 3 dimensions in play. These dimensions are, first of all, you have actions that are done on the acquirer domain. So you have the merchant and the acquirer and transactional information that is submitted between them. You have the issuer domain, so the authentication process is actually done between the cardholder and the issuer. And you, of course, have the card scheme or card network domain, which is also connecting between the 3 of them. So you have 3 domains. It's really secure. Now, while I was discussing this and I showed you the flow, I've mentioned two terms that are very important. One, I've mentioned here the term authentication, and I've mentioned here the term authorization. So these are 2 terms that confuse a lot of people, and people use them interchangeably, and people think that one means exactly the same thing. So just to put things into perspective, authorization and authentication are not the same thing. So what's the difference between them? So authorization basically refers to the act of the issuer verifying the validity of the card details that the acquirer provided and deciding based on them whether to accept the transaction or reject it. So this would be done based on a variety of parameters, such as does this card allow the cardholder to use it online? Is the acquiring country allowed? Maybe the acquiring country, the acquirer sits in a country that is blocked. Are there available funds to the cardholder in order to complete the purchase? Is the MCC something that is authorized by the merchant category code? Is this something that is authorized for this cardholder or in general for the country where the issuer is located? So all of these parameters and more would be parameters that the issuer would look into before authorizing the transaction. Now, authentication is much simpler. Authentication basically refers to the cardholder providing to the issuer a confirmation as to their identity. So authentication means that the cardholder tells the issuer, hello, this is me. And this is something very, very important because with 3D secure transactions, you cannot have authorization without authentication. But if you have authentication, it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be an authorization. So if we go back to our lovely diagram, it could be the process that we would do the whole step, get to step 8, and the issuer would tell you, yeah, I agree the cardholder has full authentication. I am aware and I confirm that this is in fact the real owner of the card, but the real owner of the card doesn't have money on this card. And therefore this will not be authorized. The next thing that, just before we go on, are there any questions? Nothing. Okay, great. So everything is clear or everyone is just in complete shock. So the next thing that I want to discuss is what's so good about 3D Secure? Why would anybody use it? What's the whole point of this presentation? So let's start first with the good things and let everyone have sort of a sweet taste for the next, the bad and the ugly parts. The first good thing about 3D Secure is something called the liability shift. So the liability shift is something that the card schemes invented in order to make it worthwhile for merchants to use 3D Secure, because obviously if the merchant doesn't see any benefit and the benefit is only for cardholders, then why would merchants try to use 3D Secure? So what is this liability shift? In general, what the card schemes have said is that for a regular non-3D Secure transaction, if there is fraud reported on a transaction and that transaction is charged back, the merchant is liable for that transaction, meaning that the merchant is going to lose money and basically nobody other than the merchant cares. Okay, so the merchant is liable and the merchant is responsible for monitoring and identifying fraud. Now, the case changes when we talk about 3D Secure, and basically the card schemes shift the liability of who's responsible for monitoring and identifying fraud from the merchant to the card issuer. Now, in order for this to happen, you need to have several parameters need to be in place. So the first thing that needs to happen is the merchant needs to request for this transaction to be done in 3D. The issuer needs to be enrolled to the 3D program. The card needs to be registered for use with 3D Secure. If all of these three parameters happen, the liability shifts and the issuer is responsible for fraud and all of the consequences of fraud, such as chargebacks and loss of money, etc. We call this situation full 3D Secure or full authentication. Now, the next step, the next scenario that we could see is the merchant might request the transaction to be done in 3D Secure, but the issuer, the card issuer says, I don't want to offer 3D Secure to my card holders. If something like this would happen, in order to penalize the issuers, the card schemes basically said if the issuer is not enrolled, there is still going to be a liability shift. Even if the transaction could not be completed with 3D Secure, but instead was completed without full authentication, as far as the card schemes are concerned, if there is any case of fraud, the issuer is to blame and the issuer would bear the liability because they're not enrolled to 3D Secure and they should be. Now we get to the complicated situation. So the merchant requests 3D Secure. The issuer is actually enrolled in the program, so the issuer in general does offer 3D Secure or has the capability of offering 3D Secure, but this particular card or card holder is not registered with the issuer for 3D Secure. if something like this happens, according to the card schemes, liability does not shift, and the merchant would be liable if the merchant chooses to still go through with the transaction, because the merchant always has the possibility of not working or not providing the services or the goods unless the transaction is fully authenticated. And of course, the last scenario, if the merchant doesn't request 3D Secure, then obviously this becomes a non-3D Secure transaction and the merchant would bear the liability. So another good thing about 3D Secure is that, well, it might come as a surprise to you, but it actually reduces fraud. So that means that it actually achieves the purpose for which it was designed. I want to show you a very small comparison. As you've seen here, some of the European countries, this is just the numbers that we've seen before on top fraud countries. So some of the European countries are countries in which fraud is above normal. For instance, France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain. All of these are countries in which fraud is above normal. And in the US, fraud is also slightly above the global average. If we compare the EU with the US, then you can see, or hopefully you can see, there are close to 800 million cards in circulation in the EU. This means debit and credit cards, 81% of which are 3D Secure enabled. And let's take the US. This is data for 2014, so some things have changed. In the US, there's 800, again, slightly over 800 cards in circulation, none of which supports 3D Secure. And you can see that in millions, the total number of card fraud losses in 2014 in the US was $4 billion. Sorry, 4 billion euros, while at the same time in the EU it was 1.3 billion euros. So the difference is 4 times the amount of fraud in the US compared to the EU. This is an enormous difference. And the one good thing that we can say about 3D Secure, first of all, it works and it reduces fraud. Now, something else that's very good with regards to 3D Secure. 3D Secure also reduces chargebacks. So I want to compare here. This is data. This is Fibonacci's data, and we want to compare 2 MCC codes. So 7995 online gambling and 6211 financial services, forex and binary. So look at the numbers here. For Visa, for 7995, 1.28% chargeback ratio without 3D Secure, 0.57 chargeback ratio with 3D Secure. With MasterCard, you can see the difference is more extreme, 1.89% without 3D Secure, 0.12% with 3D Secure. For 6211 binary forex operations, you can see the numbers. So with Visa, the difference is almost 1/2. So it reduces by half the number of chargebacks that you have. And with MasterCard, again, the difference is enormous. Almost 2.5% chargebacks without 3D Secure, 0.76 chargebacks with 3D Secure. Now, I'd like to ask of you at this point to grab hold of your seats because I'm about to tell you something a bit mind-blowing. This refers to all chargebacks, not just fraud-related chargebacks. So chargebacks can have a couple of different reasons. The main 2 reasons that we see for chargebacks are, 1, service-related chargebacks, and the other one is fraud-related chargebacks. Now, you would assume that if 3D Secure reduces fraud, it also reduces fraud-related chargebacks, which is true. But what we've seen is that using 3D Secure reduces also service-related chargebacks, and this is a mind-blowing and amazing issue. Before we move on to the bad, are there any questions? Is everything clear, or do we still have people on?
39.
Okay, good. Then I guess I'm making it very clear for everyone. So we've talked about how good 3D Secure is, and before everyone just goes ahead and connects to 3D Secure and starts using it exclusively and for every transaction, let's talk first about a couple of bad things about 3D Secure. So first of all, the first bad thing about 3D Secure is that not everybody's actually using it. So if we look, and these are very, very problematic numbers. If we look at the adoption of 3D Secure by industry, first of all, globally, 8% of transactions are done with 3D Secure. 8% of transactions worldwide are done with 3D Secure. And this is a very, very low amount. You would expect this to be slightly higher. Again, you can see that there is a differentiation based on industry. So, for instance, financial services, Forex, binary options, algo trading, 18% of transactions overall are done in 3D Secure. And this is the industry in which 3D Secure adoption is the highest. Then you have retail, 12%, online gambling, 9%, and travel, 9%. These are the adoption. If we look at the numbers based on countries, then you can see, and this also goes to what we discussed yesterday with the reduction of fraud. So you can see that overall, if we separate between small and medium merchants and large merchants would be merchants with processing volume per month of above 10 million, and small and medium would be below that. You can see that 34% of merchants, of small and medium merchants, use 3D Secure, and only 8% of large merchants globally use 3D Secure. And again, you have differences between countries. So you can see a country, for instance, like Netherlands, you have 90% adoption of 3D Secure for small and medium merchants. And you have, in addition, another country such as the US, where you have only 3% adoption for the exact same segment. The reasons for the adoption are pretty simple. If there are no cards in circulation, why would I use 3D Secure? And this goes again to whether or not 3D Secure is actually in place, offered by the issuers, available to cardholders, and also about how the implementation is done. I understand we have a question. So
indeed. The question is, do we know why 3D Secure reduces chargebacks in general?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. Why does 3D Secure reduce chargebacks in general? Well, first of all, I think it's pretty clear on why it reduces fraud-related chargebacks. First of all, you have the liability shift. So the issuers are, if the transaction was done with full authentication, technically the issuer, I'm going to say this, with sort of a grain of salt, but the issuer cannot report a 3D Secure fully authenticated transaction as fraud. They can and they do sometimes, but the numbers are very, very small. So for instance, if we look out of the total amount of fraud, full 3D authenticated fraud is less than 10%. So the numbers are very, very low. Why would it reduce service-related chargebacks? It has more of a psychological effect to it. So because there is an extra security layer, the cardholder might say, yeah, I don't know exactly what it did, and I'm not sure that I can somehow claim that there is a problem or not. So it does have some kind of psychological effect that also contributes to lowering general chargeback issues. This is another question.
One very similar. It says, in what cases does 3D prevent customer service-based chargebacks? For example, service is not provided, credit not processed.
It doesn't. It doesn't prevent. So if you've done a transaction in 3D Secure and that transaction is fully authenticated, the cardholder is he can, and there will be no problem complaining or issuing a chargeback for services not provided, not as described. So this does not prevent, it only prevents the possibility of having fraud-related chargebacks. But as I've said before in the previous answer that I gave, it does have some kind of psychological effect that helps reduce also service-related chargebacks. I wouldn't say if you are a merchant and you have service-related chargebacks, use 3D, it will solve your problem. Definitely not. But if you use 3D Secure to reduce fraud-related chargebacks, it will also have the effect of also reducing your service-related chargebacks for a variety of reasons. Mostly, again, psychological reasons. Okay.
The last question is there any way to track the relation between the use of 3D Secure and service-based chargebacks?
No. We can only draw statistics, and we can only look at and where it happens. There are certain cases, and we look at these Fibonacci's. We do these statistics on a monthly basis all the time, and we've seen some cases where the impact was significant, other cases where the impact was not significant. One of the reasons why using 3D Secure has such a psychological effect is because of most of the issuers, they use this wording that when they present a 3D Secure solution to you, that this is a more advanced, a more secure option, an option that is designed to help you avoid misuse of your card. So it sort of gives to the cardholder some kind of, I would say, some kind of confidence in the merchant, and this also helps reduce service-related chargebacks, because the cardholder might say, if the merchant is using 3D Secure, they have to be legitimate, because if it was not a legitimate merchant, then they would not be using 3D Secure. Let's move on to the ugly part of 3D Secure. Now, I warn you in advance, this is going to be quite ugly. So the first ugly aspect of 3D Secure is cardholders don't like 3D Secure. Just a couple of things that I found on Twitter. Everyone who worked on 3D Secure does not deserve to live. Oh, thank goodness this website uses verified by Visa, said no one ever. And pretty frustrated how often verified by Visa ends up stopping my legit purchase. So these are just an example of these are regular consumers and genuine complaints that they have. People don't like using 3D Secure. People don't like having an extra security layer. People don't like having another step that they need to follow through before they actually receive their purchase. And this is why a lot of people complain and a lot of people don't like using it. And this also brings me to the next part that's very much related. Because cardholders don't like 3D Secure, 3D Secure kills conversion. Now you can see here something very, very interesting. This is how the use of 3D Secure affects conversion based on country. So you can see certain countries in which 3D Secure or using 3D Secure has an adverse negative effect. For instance, look at Brazil. Almost 60% drop in sales in conversion when using 3D Secure. Even in the US, we've started to implement 3D Secure. Look at the drop, almost 50% drop in conversion. This is enormous. On the other hand, you have countries in which the impact is positive. So for instance, Russia and India, again, look, almost 30% increase in conversion when using 3D Secure. Okay, so there are millions of reasons as to why this is happening. I'll just give a couple of examples based on the different countries. So it kind of depends on the adoption rate. So if we take mostly the EU or countries in which 3D Secure adoption by issuers and in cards would be closer to 100%, then obviously people are used to using it. It gives them a certain sense of confidence in the merchant. So this would be something that would increase conversion. This is the main reason why you have it in India. In fact, most transactions, if they are not 3D secure, they will just not be authorized by the issuer. And there is, in general, what we've seen is we've seen a reduction of do not honor with and just general issuer declines when using 3D secure. Are there any questions? Good. So I want to summarize and talk about a couple of things. So the last thing that I said was 3D secure kills conversion. And obviously, I mean, you look at what people are saying, you see the numbers, it kind of makes sense. Everyone is telling me always when we talk to merchants about using 3D secure, I always hear everything, no, affiliates will not work with me, no one will come to my website, it will kill conversion, I won't have sales, salespeople will walk away, that's the end of the world, and things like that. But we've actually seen something slightly different. So I know it's going to be a bit difficult to look at the numbers. You'll see this in the presentation when you get it, but we've done an analysis for the last 6 months looking at 3D Secure numbers and how does using 3D Secure affect the overall approval ratio. And I want to show you something that is quite amazing. You have an enormous positive effect on conversion by using 3D Secure. So look at countries such as Germany. You see an average increase of 13% in approval ratio when using 3D Secure compared to without using 3D Secure. Netherlands, 17%. UK, 11%. Austria, 27%. France, 30% increase. Switzerland, 32%. One of the biggest markets for everyone. Iceland, 38% increase when using 3D Secure. You have also other countries in which, again, this has a dramatic effect. Look at India, and we've discussed this. 54% increase in approval ratio when using 3D Secure compared to non-3D Secure. Now, the main reason on why this is happening, and I see that we have a question, so hopefully this will answer or not, but the main reason why we see this increase is because the issuers, they have, internally, they have all kinds of filters that are designed to combat fraud and to flag transactions as fraudulent and decline transactions that they think might be problematic or that might not fit the general user profile. But when using 3D Secure, the user is actually authenticating the transaction. So in many cases with many issuers, that transaction just avoids all of the other filters altogether and has a higher likelihood of not being rejected, hence approved. What's the question?
The question is, if people continue to issue chargebacks and fraud, why do we keep using it?
I'm trying to see if I understand the question. If people keep on using fraud, why are we using 3D Secure? If people are reporting fraud on 3D Secure, well, that's actually a good question. It all relates to how the issuer implemented 3D Secure. So there are two ways of implementing 3D Secure. So we've mentioned when we've discussed on how 3D Secure looks like. Let me just go back to that slide. So at this stage, you will have an authentication process between the cardholder and the issuer. Now, in general, there are as many ways of doing this authentication as there are issuers in the world. But in general, I can put these methods into two general categories. The first one would be a fixed password. And that fixed password could be something that the cardholder chose themselves. It could be something that when they registered their card for 3D, the issuer gave them a fixed password. It could be something that appears on the card statement. It could be, I don't know, whatever, the last 6 digits of your social security number in the US, but the number is fixed, okay? Or the password, actually, it doesn't have to be a number, the password is fixed. The other option would be a dynamic password, a password that changes with each and every transaction. Now, if we have, so from what we've seen, about 95% of all fraud reports that are reported on 3D Secure fully authenticated transactions are reported on transactions that have a fixed password. Because obviously, I mean, and it makes sense. So if I have a fixed password and I told that password to someone, the password is compromised, and even if the 3D Secure is fully authenticated, I have doubt whether it was fully authenticated by the actual card holder or by someone who just got hold of the permanent passwords. Now, most issuers worldwide are shifting from having a fixed password to a dynamic password, but we're not there yet, and this is why you would still see fraud reported on 3D Secure transactions. Okay, any additional questions? Okay, a couple of additional issues that are important to understand on whether or not 3D Secure will have a negative effect on conversion. And I know that this is the main issue that is interesting a lot of people that when we discuss 3D Secure. So first of all, there is the matter of choice. If a customer has the possibility of using 3D Secure or not, then they would prefer not to use 3D Secure. This is something that is evident in any research that we've done. I'll give you 2 examples. So one of the MCCs that you have is ticket purchases. So if we're talking about buying a ticket online for a concert, then there are many vendors that offer these tickets. So you would just choose one that doesn't have 3D Secure because, you know, why put up with the extra step? If, on the other hand, you're trying to buy a ticket online for a rail company or any other kind of transport, usually you can't buy tickets to National Rails or Northern Railway in the UK other than from Northern Railway, so you don't really have a choice. So even if they do ask you for 3D Secure, tough luck, you have to use it. And you will use it, and people use it all the time. Additional issue is, what is the average transaction value? The higher the transaction value, the more likely people are of using 3D Secure because they would feel more safe, and they would also understand why the merchant would ask them to do that. This is also another reason on why, if we compare binary options and Forex to online gambling, which both are high-risk industries, why in Forex and in binary you have 80% adoption of 3D Secure and only I think 5% with online gambling, because of the average transaction value. The average transaction value for 6211 would be around 1,500 euro, while the average transaction value for online gambling would be around 100, 150. So people are less likely to use 3D Secure when transaction is small, more likely when the transaction is high. Geography plays a very important role. We showed you that 3D Secure adoption varies between markets, both with the number of cards by issuer as well as by the merchants. So for instance, just to give you an example from Spain, in Spain, only 16.6% of card not present transaction, meaning online transactions, go through 3D Secure, while in Belgium this is above 80%. And it's very different. Even, I mean, Spain and Belgium are not that far away from each other, and both of them are within the EU. And in both of these countries, the adoption is significantly different. Another factor that is very important is what device is used in order to facilitate the transaction. 3D Secure functionality isn't very reliable, and this is the understatement of the year. when using it on mobile devices. And this is why, if you are a merchant or an industry that has a large part of your transactions done on mobile devices, you are probably going to see a drop in conversion. And as a result, you're probably not very much likely to use 3D Secure. Now, this is something that is in process. There is 3D Secure 2.0, which should hit anytime between 2015 and 2020. It's just been delayed every year, but it is something that would improve the functionality and make it much more reliable to use it on mobile devices, because the card schemes understand that most people today just use mobile devices rather than traditional desktops. Do we have any questions? Good. So the last point that I want to make, and if you have to take one thing out of this this webinar and this presentation, it would be the following thing. When we ask you what to do with 3D Secure, then just use your head for something other than a hat rack. You cannot use 3D Secure as a tool, and you cannot use 3D Secure just across the board, have every transaction done in 3D Secure or have 0 transactions done in 3D Secure. The truth has to be, or the best practice has to be somewhere in the middle. So you need to design 3D Secure as a dynamic tool. 3D Secure needs to be used in countries that you know the adoption is high, maybe only for users that are coming through desktop devices rather than mobile devices. It should be used only if a transaction exceeds a certain amount. And it should only be used in markets and geographies that you know are problematic. And you can play also with the liability shift and choose to have choose to enforce the liability shift, whether or not you accept only fully authenticated transactions, or if you accept any transactions even if they are not fully authenticated. It's basically based on you, based on the merchant, and you need to decide on what would be the best course of action. And when you use it that way, then you will see that, and we've had tremendous experience with this in the last, I would say, 6 months, that when 3D Secure is used dynamically, used smart, it actually improves the approval ratio and improves conversion rather than lower it. And you will see the numbers based on countries also in the presentation. Overall, we see when using 3D Secure, again, not 100%, but using it smartly, we can see on average about 20% approval ratio across the board, 20% increase in approval ratio across the board. Obviously, having 20% is quite bad than approval ratio, and this is definitely the way we would recommend using it. Do we have any additional questions? Maybe someone from the audience. Okay, everyone is shy today. So if you do remember anything, and if you do remember anything at some point and you do have additional questions, if you are one of our merchants, then please feel free to contact your account manager, and they'll be happy to discuss 3D Secure with you, or to just apply it across the board for every transaction. Or if you have any additional questions, if you're not a merchant of Fibonatics, feel free to send it to events@fibonatics.com. And at this point, I'd also like to invite you to join our next webinar, the end of September, which is going to be Compliance 101. Everything you need to know and we're afraid to ask about company formation, website compliance, all of the different things that the card schemes request and that you might hear from PSPs, acquirers, etc. Or you can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, or through our website, which soon will be up and running and new. So thanks you, everyone, and have a great day.